English.
For this case, you'll have 20 minutes to make your presentation in front of the judges. If your presentation lasts under 80 minutes, you will receive a 1-point penalty for every 30 seconds. If your presentation lasts under 50 minutes, your team will receive the score of 0 at the general ranking for this case. If after 20 minutes you have not completed the presentation, you will be stopped to move on to the period of question. At the end of the presentation, the judge will have 5 minutes to ask the question. I remind the jury that it is mandatory to ask a minimum of 1 question during this period. If after 5 minutes you have not finished answering the question, you will be stopped. Throughout the presentation, I will indicate the remaining time using cardboard at 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds. I will make a countdown using my finger for the last 10 seconds. I remind you that it is prohibited to say the name of your university, and if you do it, you will receive a penalty. I also remind the public that it is prohibited to use any electronic device during the presentation and that the public must stay quiet until the end of the period of question. Before we begin, I'm asking the room to turn off their cell phone and put them on mute so that we don't interrupt the presentation. I will now ask the judge to present themselves, and after you will be free to start the presentation.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Benoît Couture, je suis directeur de la dotation à Revenu Québec.
Bonjour, Stéphanie Terrien, je suis directrice de l'éthique et du développement durable à Revenu Québec.
Bonjour, Anne-Catherine Lebeau, je suis directrice générale d'Écoseno.
Bonjour, Josée Montréal, vice-présidente de la protection des droits et à l'éthique à Revenu Québec.
Okay, great. Thank you for all being here today. We hope you're doing well. My name is Danielle, and I'm here today with my colleagues Charlotte and Eloise. And today we're going to be talking to you about Ecoseno. Now, before diving into our presentation, we wanted to give a bit of context to the problem. Canadians make up 0.5% of the world's population, yet they contribute to 2% of the world's waste. And this is a very startling statistic, and our team has found that this is largely due to a mindset. So, traditionally, we're thinking of a linear economy when we think of our products. And while this is a kind of old-timers way to think, Ecoseno is trying to repurpose this, and they're trying to show that a circular economy is more optimal. And so we find that although it is difficult to change Canadians' mindset, and that's often the most challenging thing that we're going to face, it's not impossible, and that's what we'd like to show you today. So, briefly going over the agenda, we're going to dive into Ecoseno and who they are first, and then we're going to look at some of the challenges that they're facing, both socially, governmentally, and environmentally. Then we're going to dive into its strategic direction and look into the decision criteria that we looked into to make our decision for the recommendation. Then we're going to look at some risk mitigation techniques, our recommendation finally, some financials, an implementation timeline, and last but not least, a few key takeaways. So who is Ecoseno? Well, Ecoseno is a company that optimizes and rethinks material production. And as I said before, they do this through a circular economy and not the traditional linear economy that we often think of. But first and foremost, they act as a broker between producers and buyers. And they do this by using their optimization service and their support service, where they actively repurpose materials and also look into how producers can repurpose their own materials and provide some kind of consulting, if you will. But in pursuit, this is the problem that we're facing today, is that Ecoseno is trying to pursue a growth strategy, and we need to figure out which avenue they're going to take, and also what diversified portfolio of revenues we're going to do this with. So diving right into our challenges, the first one we're going to focus on today is social challenges. So as I mentioned before, it's all about the mindset, and currently there's a major lack of awareness regarding the circular economy. So that's the first major challenge that Ecoseno has to overcome, is moving away from that traditional linear economy and introducing the circular economy, not just among themselves and their employees, but also outside of that in the cultural industry.
Another challenge they face is that of environmental. First and foremost, what is really presented is potentially the lack of demand. Although they do have supply, the lack of demand can really pose a huge environmental consequence, because due to the fact that, well, they're not able to find any buyers to repurpose this set, which is really the whole premise of their strategy and their organization. In addition to that, another environmental aspect is being able to really transform the sets into reusable materials, as stated in the case as well. For example, let's just say we were trying to repurpose a set with wood in it. However, it has been used in such a way in which there are other materials such as glue, and as a result, we are unable to repurpose the materials. An additional challenge in the environmental aspect is the product life cycle, because currently at the moment, Ecoseno has no inventory system and no warehouse or physical location to keep their inventory. The inconsistencies in the product life cycle do produce an environmental consequence because of the fact that, well, if they're not able to resell them within a certain amount of days, they must dispose of it.
And lastly, the last challenge is about governance. Currently in Quebec, there is no regulatory framework concerning environmental laws. And this is also true in the cultural industry, where there's no laws about how the waste management of the resources should be done. There's also no incentives to foster how materials should be reused, and therefore the government does not give any alternatives to people in the cultural industry to dispose of their materials. And lastly, there is no reporting structure of grants where the company have to file a report where it gives them what footprint they do every year, and by this in this way, they're able to modify the way that they're using their materials and how they're conducting their business to be more sustainable.
So now when really looking at the strategic direction of Ecoseno, we can see that their whole objective is really based around the fact that they want to develop a sustainable action plan aligned with the three aspects of environmental, social, and governance goals of the company. Also, while developing a model that is profitable, socially acceptable, and environmentally friendly in the long run. Their current mission is, as you can see, to reduce the ecological footprint of the industry by executing a circular economic strategy. And the vision here is really to become a market leader in supporting the low-carbon cultural industry while transforming the previous traditional mindset by championing a circular economic strategy.
So in choosing our recommendation, we decided to create a sort of decision matrix to help us with the solution. So the three options that we were faced with was first, renting out a warehouse, second, developing an online platform, and third, hiring a sales or broker specialist to help with the operations. Now the criteria that we chose to look at these solutions was first scalability. So how large can we make this project in the long term, and how successful will it be able to be? Second, obviously the obvious one, is budgetary constraints. You have to make sure that we're within our budget limits and very comfortably so. And lastly, strategic alignment. So how well does this fit with Ecoseno's core mission and vision, and how can we make sure that it remains close to this mission and vision in the long term? So ultimately, we went with a scale from 1 to 3, 1 being the lowest, 3 being the highest, and we rated each criteria for each solution accordingly. And in the end, we decided to choose renting the warehouse because it came out with the highest total score, and it's both scalable in the long term, it fits within the budgetary constraints, and it's closely aligned with the strategic mission of Ecoseno, unlike the online platform, which had a lot of uncertainties, and the sales specialist, which might work in the short term, but might not be very good in the long term for the strategy.
Now it's important to really consider the different risk mitigations, and here we have evaluated them in three folds. First, financial, second, legal, and third, reputational. Now in terms of the financial mitigation, as mentioned earlier by Danielle, it's really important that we stay in a correct budgetary limits. We don't want to go over it, however, we don't want to underspend either, so we can really make as much as we can with the constraints we currently have. We also really want to ensure that we are profitable in the long term. As mentioned again earlier, we don't want to just look for short-term initiatives, and we really want to prioritize sound investment and financing strategies. In terms of legal, as mentioned earlier by Eloise, we must ensure that we can abide by any of the provincial and national regulatory bodies and ensure that the reporting structures are impactful. As seen in the case as well, some of the reporting structures in place are not as impactful as they could be. Although regulatory frameworks, some of them do exist and some companies do have reporting structures, they don't really have this incentive to go further and really make sure that this is being carried out in the long run. And finally, in terms of reputational, we really want to keep the integrity of Ecoseno's core mission, as well as maintain a positive relationship with our stakeholders to maintain trust and improve our brand image.
So we have decided, as we mentioned before, to go with the warehouse strategy, as we believe that that this strategy has many advantages. The first one is that we can increase the sale price as we are able to have more time to find the best buyer for our resources. This will also allow us to rent the materials to buyer, as we will have a place to gather all of the resources and to then vend them and repurpose them in our warehouse. And this will lead to our increase in our customer loyalty and trust, since the customers will be able to go in our warehouse and to see the products available and see what fits their needs the best. And lastly, we will be able to increase the quality control and the resource management of our resources that we're getting from producers, and to be sure that what is redistributed is perfectly fine in terms of safety and of quality for the repurposement. Lastly, we also want to continue using our Facebook platform, as it already have 800 followers. But we want to increase the visibility, as it is one of the ways where the producers will be able to lend or buy the resources from Ecoseno. And we want to do that by partnering with major pioneers in the cultural industry. So by that we mean that we want to be featured on their website, or sometimes on some brochures, so that we will gain visibility in this industry. And that will also gain for those firms that will partner with us, since it will be an incentive for them to be seen as a pioneer in a sustainability industry and a circular also economy. So they will gain in their brand image and reputation by partnering with Ecoseno.
So as per our recommendation, we're first going to look more toward the social aspect, since we addressed the social challenges first. So Ecoseno already has their support service, but from what we understood, it's more just like a consulting service, and they kind of tell them what's best to repurpose, and that's kind of where it ends. But what we were thinking to do is to make it more of an educational program. So not only are we consulting on what's best to repurpose and how best to do so, but also why it's important, how this can help in the long term, in the hopes of having the producer do it themselves eventually, and make the circular economy more of the mainstream mindset. We're also going to leverage our marketing strategies in order to improve our reputation and brand image. And last but not least, work with local producers in order to foster more trust and closer stakeholder engagement.
As for our governance recommendation, as we mentioned, it was a challenge for us, since there are no regulatory frameworks. So firms currently don't have to follow any laws regarding ecological issues. So we want to collaborate with the government and the ministries of environment and culture to be sure that there are regulations in place to make this industry, and as well as Quebec, a more eco-friendly environment. And we also want to improve the regulatory reporting, as we want every company and people from the industry to be able to report what their carbon footprint is every year, so that they're able to improve the following year.
We also believe that currently Ecoseno's mindset and their whole initiative in place really does foster this whole environmental aspect, just because of the fact that their whole business model is revolved around the fact that they're trying to reuse as well as reduce waste in general. However, although this may be so, by implementing the strategy in which we will rent a warehouse, we will be able to further continue promoting this whole circular economy mindset, as well as really extend the product life cycle by having this sort of storage unit in place for our inventory.
So you may ask yourself, how will we finance all of those programs? Well, first of all, we believe that all of those three revenues for resources and revenues are the best to be combined together, and I will now explain why. So for the material management service, we believe that by lowering our price to $450, It will be a greater incentive to firms to do business with us, and also it will improve their habits of going for more reusable alternatives. And also, this will lead us to get more resources that we will be able to give a new life, and also to rent or to sell to new producers. We will also choose to go with a price of replacement value that will be from 25% to 50% of the initial value, as we really want, in the short term at least, to really improve and give the incentive to people to go with Ecoseno instead of buying new materials. And by lowering our price, since we're a non-profitable company, the profit in the long term is to be reinvested in the company. So really, we really want to, in the short term, to make the company go with Ecoseno and make it a thing that they will do in the long term, and not buy new material. Always go with Ecoseno for every project that they have. And lastly, with all the profit that we will do with that, we think that a non-commercial marketing strategy is really a good way to promote our brand image as a sustainable brand. And this can also be in a partnership with other industries that want to be perceived as a sustainable company. And by that, those companies will maybe be able to help us gain materials that maybe won't be profitable for us to help with that, but they will at least gain some brand reputation and brand image from partnering with us. And this is a great marketing cost that will help in the long term for a more sustainable vision of this industry. So now we're going to go through some financials to go over and to be sure that everything in the long term is feasible. So first, since the cost of the warehouse is $80,000 per year, we believe that in the long term it's going to be about $380,000. So, and this is our short-term period that we believe that this strategy would work. But also, since we are renting, we also have the benefit of having tax deduction from renting. So that is beneficial for Ecoseno. And also, we believe that other costs from like pertaining the material, getting the containers, and just the staff and everything will have costs of about $300K per year. And for our income, we believe that, as it was mentioned, there's about 12 containers per producer after a project. And this, with our new price, will lead to about $5,500 every 2 weeks of gaining 12 containers for Ecoseno. So we believe that in a year we can gain $135,000 per year only for that part of the maintenance and gaining material. And lastly, we believe that an average price for how much we can sell the material that we gain from those containers, or what we gain, would be about $600 depending on what the item is. So on average, we believe that we can make up to $7,050 per year to $1 million. And so overall, we believe that it is a pretty profitable way of doing business for a period of 8 years.
So now looking and deep diving into our implementation and how what Eloise said is going to carry out through the years. Well, first we started with an 8-year time span to really see whether our warehouse strategy is feasible and try to see and assess whether that is the way to go in the long run. So first, from the get-go, we will need to scout and select an optimal warehouse location. Where would we be? Why would this be the best place? We would then need to develop an operation strategy for the transportation. As mentioned, since we are the ones responsible for picking up the containers and bringing them to our warehouse, as well as disposal of sets, as mentioned earlier, because we cannot essentially always guarantee that we will be able to sell the materials in the sets. We have to account for this cost as well. Next, one key and critical thing we must do is really improve the content of our support service, as mentioned earlier by Danielle, and to further develop our referral program, just to make sure that this can be a feasible B2B marketing program. We'll also begin by working with the government to develop a concrete framework in place. As mentioned, there are no sort of developed structures in place, no regulatory frameworks at the moment in Quebec. So it's really important that we can ensure that this is developed. And as mentioned earlier, in the long run, we really want to assess whether choosing the warehouse strategy is the best thing to implement. Hence, we will have reporting programs for Ecoceno ourselves to see whether this is feasible and whether we should continue with doing so.
So before we go into the Q&A, we're going to leave you with a few key takeaways. So as you mentioned before, we've decided to go with the warehouse strategy for Ecoceno, largely because we believe that it is scalable, it's sound budgetarily, and it most aligns with Ecoceno's mission and vision. And we also feel that it's going to be efficient in promoting the circular economy further and kind of diverting from the traditional linear economy that's so ingrained in our mindsets today. We're also going to leverage our reform support service program, where we're focusing more on education rather than just consultancy, in order to bring more awareness in circular economy and hopefully make this status quo in the industry for the long term. And also this is going to improve our brand image, also with the marketing programs that we're going to bring in through our diversified revenue portfolio. And last but not least, we're going to work with the government to establish regulations and incentivize the shift further to the circular economy, so that, again, hopefully it's the status quo moving forward. So we thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and we welcome questions in both French and English, although I won't be answering in French today. Thank you.
Concernant le travail de collaboration avec le gouvernement, est-ce que vous aviez davantage en tête un lobby ou vous aviez en tête en fait des démarches vraiment d'une nature différente, d'abord vous adresser ou faire parvenir de la documentation, faire connaître l'activité au gouvernement, puis essayer de les intéresser à développer davantage le cadre légal et réglementaire?
Je pense qu'on avait plus en tête d'aller avec la deuxième option que vous avez mentionnée, plus au début apporter notre projet, nos idées, pour que ça commence à plus se faire connaître, puisque c'est pas nécessairement un modèle qui est connu par tout le monde. Et puis par la suite, si c'est capable de prendre un peu plus de popularité et tout ça, on pourrait peut-être avec d'autres compagnies similaires ou même l'industrie elle-même, on pourrait commencer par faire des lobbies, mais au départ, je crois qu'il faut vraiment commencer par amener l'idée et voir comment le gouvernement répond à nos propositions.
You mentioned a lot reporting. Would that be part of our business model, to take care of the reporting and like how we are improving the footprint of the cultural sector?
Yeah, so the reporting was actually also going along with working with the government, so it was placing regulations so that there's more transparency in the industry as a whole and that people are more incentivized to report. So yeah, it was something that Ecoceno was going to do, it was something that we were going to do in collaboration with the government.
And adding on that, also Ecoceno would not be the one giving the reports and all of that, but could be give advice to the companies on how they could improve the result of their reports. That would be an alternative to help them gain awareness on how they can be more sustainable.
Thank you.